This video is for use as a reference tool by people certified by the Wisconsin Department of Health Services as lead risk assessors or lead hazard investigators. It covers the complete risk assessment process required when assessing a residential or child-occupied property to determine the existence, nature, severity, and location of lead-based paint hazards. This video will also highlight the additional criteria required when conducting a risk assessment of a property where a child has been identified with an elevated blood lead level. Please contact Jeff Raish-Gill with the Wisconsin Childhood Lead Poisoning Prevention Program at 608-266-9382 with questions regarding this video or the risk assessment protocol. When you arrive for your appointment at a property, make sure you are professional and friendly to the owner or tenants if a rental property. Introduce yourself and make sure to identify your agency and why you are there. Explain what you will be doing during the risk assessment. Let the family know that you are only there to assess the property for lead hazards and to identify the source of lead exposure if the risk assessment is being conducted because of an elevated blood lead level, or EBL. If you are able to, help the family feel comfortable with you being in their home and that their privacy is not being invaded. They will be more likely to cooperate and provide information that could be helpful when assessing the property. Make sure you remove your shoes or put on booties so there is no chance of contamination from your feet. The first step of a risk assessment is to gather detailed background information. If you are doing the risk assessment because a child has an EBL, complete HUD Form 16.1. For all other risk assessments, complete HUD Form 5.0. Listen carefully to statements and comments made during the interview and use the information to ask additional questions to get the most accurate picture you can of the property's history and the family's use patterns. The goal is to get as much information as possible about where children eat, sleep, and play, and any possible non-pain sources of lead that could exist. For EBL cases, this could reveal other locations outside of the home that will also require assessing. After the interview, the next step is to complete a building condition survey and visual assessment of the property. Walk slowly around the exterior of the property and note any building components that are damaged, missing, or could contribute to the failure of other components or substrate material. Record your observations and comments on HUD Form 5.1. Look at the entire yard, paying close attention to paint chips on the ground or in the drip line around the house and any outbuildings. Look for areas of bare soil, especially where there is evidence that children play or might play in the area. At the same time, take note of any areas of deteriorated paint that will have to be tested later. It is a good idea to take pictures of all four sides of the exterior of the house. These can be helpful to review the actual number and location of windows and roof lines. It is not required, but a picture of the house also looks professional on the cover of your risk assessment report. Finish the building condition survey and visual assessment by going through the entire interior of the property. Document all signs of component or substrate failure. Document all locations that show evidence of surface coating deterioration, are friction or impact surfaces, or show chewing or bite marks. Make sure to include the basement and the attic if there is easy access to the space. Basements are part of the living space and should be assessed. Pay close attention to basement windows, painted floors and walls, and any other painted storage cabinets or shelves. An evaluation of the plumbing system should be done as well. Locate the water service lateral coming into the property and verify it is not a lead service line. Lead is a soft metal and is easily scratched with a sharp object. A magnet will help identify galvanized steel pipe from lead pipes because a magnet will stick to galvanized steel. It will not stick to lead. Assess the plumbing system after the water meter or pressure tank if the property has a private well. Look for solder joints and brass fittings in the plumbing system. If you find these, note them in your field notes. If you have concerns about lead in the drinking water based on this assessment, corrective measures should be recommended. However, most lead exposure comes from sources other than water. Sketch out a floor plan of the house. You can do the entire dwelling at once, or you can draw a room or section of the house at a time and put the pieces together in your office at a later time to make a complete floor plan. You are required to show the location on a floor plan of each dust wipe sample and paint chip sample you collect. Each location should be labeled to match the corresponding sample ID number you assign. The drawing must include the entire yard if a fence, detached garage, or other types of outbuildings were tested, and must show the location of soil samples if any are collected. Once the exterior and interior visual assessment is completed and you have a floor plan drawing, proceed next with collecting dust wipe samples. It is especially important to collect dust wipe samples before any paint chip samples are collected to avoid creating a lead hazard that may not have existed prior to you removing a paint chip. Collect one wipe sample within 10 feet of a main entrance to the outside. If you are assessing a multi-unit dwelling, remember to sample common areas. Common areas like porches, shared entrances, hallways, and stairwells are considered part of the dwelling space and must be assessed. Being careful to touch the tape, carefully mark out the area to be sampled. Put on a clean pair of gloves for each wipe sample. Make a sweeping S motion in 2 directions, being careful to not let your wipe go outside the tape. Fold the wipe dirty side in after each pass. Although not required, HUD recommends following the ASTM sampling standards, which required 1 additional pass around the outside. Fold the wipe 1 more time, dirty side in, and place it inside the sample tube. Label the tube with a unique sample ID number and record the location on your floor plan and complete HUD Form 5.4a showing the surface type and accurate dimensions of the area sampled. Repeat this process in each room throughout the property where children under 6 years of age may spend time. This includes a basement floor and basement steps if children use this space. If you are not sure if children use a room or space, you must assume they do and collect samples from that area. A plastic pre-measured dust wipe template may be used instead of measuring and creating a sampling area using tape. If you use a template, it must be taped securely in place so it does not move. It is critical to clean the template thoroughly after every use to avoid cross-contamination from other floors. Windows present special concerns when wipe sampling. To avoid your wipe touching the window sash and creating possible cross-contamination, open the window slightly before sampling. Creating as large of a sample area as possible will help avoid getting a high reporting limit value in your lab results. Wear a new pair of gloves for each sill. Wipe first in one direction, fold the wipe dirty side in, then wipe back in the opposite direction. Fold the dirty side in again, then place the wipe inside the sample tube. Make sure the wipe only touches the surface of the sill and does not touch the inside of the window trough along the front edge of the windowsill or the sash. Measure the area after collecting the wipe sample to avoid contaminating the area. Record this information. Make sure you measure accurately. Being off by as little as 1/8 of an inch can change your results enough to give a result that is below the hazard standard when, if measured accurately, the true result would have been above the standard. When the assessment is done to investigate a lead-poisoned child, dust wipes may be collected from any surface you suspect may have lead. When the surface has an irregular shape, it cannot be measured accurately. In these situations, the measurement section on your chain of custody is left blank, and the lab will report total lead on the wipe. If any lead is detected, it would be a possible source and need further evaluation. Remember that the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, sets the allowable level of lead in food, candy, powders, and cosmetics. Refer to current FDA regulations for these limits. When investigating because of a lead-poisoned child, pay close attention to bathtubs, sinks, or other household fixtures that have porcelain or enamel glazed finish. This glazing may contain high levels of lead and could be a possible lead hazard, especially if the glazing is chipped, scratched, or worn. Neither the Department of Housing and Urban Development nor the Wisconsin Department of Health Services have a set hazard standard for glazing because it is not considered a surface coating. For porcelain or enamel glazed surfaces, it is recommended to use the most protective standard, which is the allowable lead level set by the Consumer Product Safety Commission for children's products. For quality assurance, 1 field blank is required for each dwelling tested. To prepare a blank sample, put on a clean pair of gloves and fold a new, unused wipe to look like other wipes you collected. Place it into a sample tube and label with a sample ID number. This ID number should correspond to an anonymous location you assign on the chain of custody. It should only be recorded as a blank in your personal field notes. Do not let the lab know it's a blank. If the lab result of your field blank is above 5 micrograms, it indicates contamination from your supplies and all of your sample results are invalid. It is not recommended to use a correction value to recalculate the results. New dust wipe samples will need to be collected. Using an X-ray fluorescence analyzer, or XRF, for risk assessments is the most efficient method of testing paint or other coated surfaces. Only a certified lead risk assessor is allowed to operate an XRF. Lead hazard investigators may not use an XRF analyzer because they have not completed the required radiation safety training. Follow the manufacturer's guidelines to check the instrument's calibration before taking any readings with the XRF analyzer. Then proceed to take readings on every surface or testing combination in every room equivalent that has deteriorated paint, is a friction or impact surface, or shows signs of chewing. You do not have to test surfaces that are not deteriorated. Take readings on areas where the paint is the thickest, making sure to get all layers to represent the complete paint history. Remember that color is not an accurate predictor of paint history. If you get a positive reading indicating the presence of lead-based paint, you are allowed to conclude that all like surfaces or like testing combinations within that room equivalent are also lead-based paint. If you get a negative reading, it is only representative of that single surface or testing combination. Continue to test all other like surfaces and testing combinations in each room equivalent with deteriorated paint. You may not presume lead-based paint is not present on a surface. Paint chip samples are required to verify all inconclusive readings from an XRF, or you must presume that there is lead-based paint. Document each individual XRF reading in your field notes. Because a large number of readings may be taken in a thorough risk assessment, the location of each reading is not marked on the floor plan. Instead, for each XRF reading, record the room equivalent, component, room side, substrate, and the reading result in milligrams per square centimeter. While not required, it is helpful to also note the type of surface deterioration. For example, peeling paint, chipping paint, if it is an impact or friction surface, or if a painted surface shows evidence of chewing. HUD does not provide a form to record XRF readings, so it is recommended that you create your own method for recording this information in the field. Using abbreviations and codes will make recording much faster and easier. When the risk assessment is part of an EBL investigation, you may also test other items like furniture, pottery, and toys. Caution must be used when testing these types of items because children's furniture, toys, and jewelry have limits for lead set by the Consumer Product Safety Commission in parts per million. Only an XRF that is designed to give a reading in parts per million can be used in these situations. Readings in milligrams per square centimeter cannot be converted to parts per million. If any value other than 0 is shown, the item should be tested by a more accurate means of analysis. Using an XRF on bathtubs and sinks can detect lead in the glaze finish, indicating the need to follow up with dust wipe sampling covered earlier in this video. Hazard investigators are allowed to conduct risk assessments in Wisconsin, but are not allowed to operate an XRF. As mentioned earlier, paint chips are intended primarily to verify an inconclusive reading from an XRF or to test paint in dwellings with very limited deterioration. If there are a large number of locations that will need to be tested, paint chip sampling is not recommended. When selecting a location to take a paint chip sample, always look for areas that are the thickest and give complete paint history of that component. Many times, this may be on the edges, top, or bottom of a component. These areas are also less visible since paint chip sampling is destructive to the surface coating. This video is not intended to meet any OSHA training requirements. Follow your agency policy for using personal protective equipment. Place an unused 4-foot by 4-foot plastic containment sheet on the floor under the location to be sampled. Wearing new gloves, mark out the size of the chip to be removed. Using a 1-inch chisel will eliminate the need to measure using a ruler. Most labs want paint chips that are approximately 4 square inches in size. This can be achieved by taking a 2-inch by 2-inch sample or a 1-inch by 4-inch sample. Check with your lab for size and weight requirements of paint chip samples. Using a heat gun operated at less than 1,100 degrees Fahrenheit works the best for removing all of the paint layers with little effort. If you do not have a heat gun or are not able to use one in a particular location, score the surface several times in 2 different directions to form very small squares that can be removed. Using your chisel upside down helps to control the amount of substrate that is removed. Record the location of each paint chip sample on the floor plan and complete HUD Form 5.3. If there are a lot of paint layers that you suspect are not lead-based paint, or if substrate material is collected along with paint, request that the laboratory report the results in milligrams per square centimeters. This is the most accurate method of reporting, but requires the size of your chip sample to be accurate within 1/16 of an inch of the measurement you put on your chain of custody. Under no circumstances should paint chips be picked up from the bottom of a window trough or from the ground and used to identify a component as having lead-based paint. Paint chip samples that are not collected following the approved protocol are not valid samples, and the results cannot be used. Because you may have created a hazard by collecting a paint chip that disturbs lead-based paint in the process, some measures should be taken to protect the location until the lab results are reported. This could be placing a duct tape patch over the location or making sure you or the property owner coat the location with shellac or latex paint. Take pictures of each area of deterioration for your report. Pictures can be helpful to refresh your memory if you have any question about the deterioration and severity of the hazard when writing your risk assessment report. It is not required, but it is a good practice to include these photos as an attachment to your report. Repeat the same process for the exterior, testing all deteriorated paint and photographing those areas. Make sure to assess all garages, sheds, outbuildings, or painted fences. The entire property must be assessed. If there are any areas or room equivalents that you do not assess, you must state this and the reason why they were not assessed in your risk assessment report. If areas of bare soil were identified during your visual assessment, collect 1 composite soil sample from each play area you identified and 1 composite sample from other areas of bare soil you found. Composite soil samples are made up of 3 to 10 small subsamples of the top 5/8 inch of soil. These subsamples should be from randomly selected locations within the area of bare soil. If the family indicated during the questionnaire interview that they eat food grown in a garden, a soil sample should also be collected from the garden. Review the protocol for sampling gardens in the HUD guidelines. The process for sampling garden soil is different from sampling bare soil in the yard. Complete HUD Form 5.5 and record the location of soil samples collected on a sketch of the entire property that shows the house, any outbuildings, fences, or other structures. After you have assessed the entire dwelling and property, make sure all of your garbage, such as tape, used gloves, wet wipes, and any other trash you generated, is collected and brought with you for disposal at your office. Wisconsin Administrative Code DHS 163.149K lists the 18 required items that must be included in your final risk assessment report. Using the risk assessment report template created by DHS will save you time and ensure all required information is included in your report. Contact Jeff Raish-Gill for a copy of the master template. DHS 163 requires risk assessors to deliver the final report to the property owner within 10 working days after receiving the laboratory results. A large part of the report can be completed without the lab results. It is good practice to write as much of the report as possible as soon as you return to your office. It is especially important to complete your report in a timely manner when there is a child in the property with an elevated blood lead level.